An F-16 pilot who's now a keynote speaker said of Henry, his type of disciplined approach has saved numerous lives in the world of aviation, healthcare, and other professions that include high-risk contexts. I always, when I'm talking to Henry, who's a very smart guy, I always feel that he's underappreciated. We don't know how many lives he's saved, but I imagine it's very considerable.
All right, we'll start. You can tell from my accent that I'm American. Can't help that. I was just born there. Not my fault. And I live in Val d'Isère in France. So that's a little bit about my background that maybe helps to explain a bit about how this unusual thing came together. Avalanche risk management and reducing accidents that can be avoided. Start with looking at the problem, which is avoidable errors that cause accidents, and then we'll look at the solution. The solution, a prevention framework that I've pulled together, but based on quite a few other precedents. One of them comes from actually the financial sector. Now, to summarize the problem here, what I've done is the next bit is a 2-minute video that I did for some surgeons on the subject of reducing avoidable death and reducing avoidable injury in surgery. So check out this video, and then we'll come back to summarizing what the problem is. It's important to know what the problem is before you come up with a solution, and it'll help for you to understand the framework that I've put together. Not all examples of poor practice lead to problems. It's the same thing in surgery as it is in avalanches. In fact, most of the time mistakes are made, nothing happens at all. But once in a while, these obvious, sometimes small mistakes trigger a massive breakdown. A breakdown where everything falls apart and it leads to big and bad results. Much like what happens when everything falls apart in an avalanche accident. In deadly avalanche accidents, over 90% of the time, the victim or the victim's group is responsible for triggering the avalanche. And research has shown that, in most cases, avalanche victims should have known better. Indeed, in many cases, it is a professional that is involved. In medicine, it's not the victim that does the triggering, it's generally the practitioner that triggers the breakdown. And those effects can be as devastating as an avalanche. But in the cases of avoidable injury and avoidable death, it's exactly the same thing. They should have known better. In both cases, in the operating room and in the mountains, intelligent, well-trained individuals are shown to have made obvious, avoidable mistakes that led to these big and bad consequences.
Wall of snow.
Let's speak with Henry Schneewin now, who is an avalanche and off-piste expert. And Henry,
what happened was it happens in 90–95% of all avalanche accidents. It was triggered by a person. Usually that's the person and the victim themselves or someone in their group. But it takes a long time to dig snow out, and there's techniques for it. And snow is actually a very heavy thing. Even light snow is a very heavy thing, so you need a technique for digging it out. And prevention is really the best thing to do, and try to prevent being caught up in an avalanche. Because once you do get caught up in an avalanche, it's very difficult to get out of it. And once you're buried, you only have about 15 minutes to live. So it seems that this risk context, we're prone to base our decisions on very simple things like it could be a promise to a client that, and I'm professional, so I'm going to follow my commitments. I'm going to follow through with them. I'm going to deliver, not under-deliver, not over-deliver. I'm going to deliver on it, so I'm going to stick with that, rather than base my decision on facts and evidence. That's the key problem here, is that when the accident happens, the hushed tones between us professionals is that, well, they really should have known better. The fact is that they did know better, but they just weren't applying. They weren't applying their experience and knowledge, and there was something that was misleading them. And it turns out that there are things like commitment, familiarity, it's a familiar environment, and we've made that commitment to the client that we're going to go and we're going to take them to the top of that summit, sort of a summit fever, and ski off the backside. So decisions, it's been found in these accidents that they're based on a flawed basis. They're not based on facts and evidence that could be around, and that's what this environment leads us to do, is make these flawed decisions. And what's happened with us is in this Avalanche community that I've been part of for about 30 years. About 20 years ago, the people like Daniel Kahneman, who is a behavioral psychologist, but also you're probably familiar with him, and I know he's been mentioned a lot in the talks and sessions here. He has helped us to understand that things that we're basing our decisions on as experts can be flawed and very misleading, like intuition. The intuition that we're following, and as he mentions here, is that especially as experts, we'll follow them even when we're wrong. And apparently it's even proportional that the more experience we have, the more expertise we think we have, the more we'll trust our intuitions. And that is what has got most avalanche victims into serious trouble. And I found very well known for having created the World Health Organization Surgical Safety Checklist, which is required for every surgical team performing a surgical act in the UK at this time. And it's been shown to reduce these kinds of accidents that they found in surgery, like what they call wrong site surgery, operating on the wrong limb, or doing the right operation but on the wrong person. It happens very rarely, but enough so that attention needs to be paid to it. A lot of them, these types of avoidable injury and avoidable death in surgery are called never events, because they should never happen. And so the next slide here is, I'm just going to show you, it's a one-pager, this surgical safety checklist, very quickly, because I want to show you the framework, because that's helped me move forward towards the framework that I've made. So very quickly, it's 3 columns, and before the anesthesia, before skin incision, and before the patient leaves the operating room.
It's very key basic points on how to be safe. For example, it's outlined in this framework here. And the problem is that most of the time, even when it's very unstable and somewhat dangerous, most of the time nothing happens. So we get led into not only a sense of complacency, but also bad habits can be validated, like sort of following tracks.
What I've done is I've taken that framework and I've plugged in some of your financial planning points. And so what I did is I did decision making. So instead of where you go, I put the plan, implementing the plan for risk management, and crisis management is asset allocation. And safe investments can be compared to the terrain traps, the volatility. Asset allocation is the distances. You don't want to weight the slope with too much weight in one place, because that can make it unstable.
Apparently we make 30 errors a day, all of us. And the trick here is just to reduce, what we need to do is reduce the consequences of making errors in high consequence kinds of contexts like avalanche terrain. And so that's a big part of how I got this checklist framework together. Also, these key points, accident reduction, basic accident reduction points, are things that the victims did not apply when you look at just most accidents.
In conclusion, avalanches, the impact of increasing temperatures on avalanches. Will there be more wet snow avalanches? Well, yes, there already are. There's a lot more wet snow avalanches that have been happening over the last few decades, and that will continue as temperatures continue to rise. And it's more work for the local authorities for trying to protect the general public on whether it's roads, pistes, runs, and walking paths. So will that lead to more or less accidents than off-piste and ski touring? Well, you might think, well, logically, according to the statistics, that maybe there will be less accidents because most accidents involve cold, dry snow. However, the answer to this question, will there be more or less accidents, it depends on you, and it depends on me, and it depends on us applying very simple accident reduction points, simple prevention points. And the two I'm going to share with you are avoiding steep slopes over terrain traps. Terrain traps are anything that makes an avalanche, the consequences of an avalanche that much worse. So you could have a small avalanche that takes you over a cliff, and it could be really deadly. If it carries you into a hole, that's a terrain trap. That can make it more deadly because you get buried deeper. And to give some image to that, this is a very tragic accident where a father and his daughter, 12-year-old daughter, were killed. And you can see it is under steep slopes of 30 degrees or more. 30 degrees is quite steep. About a black run steepness is the threshold at which avalanches that have any consequence to us will release from. And then there's a terrain trap. It's like a gun barrel. It's like a trench there where the snow built up really deep. And the key points for safety to help us be safer out on the mountain in terms of avalanches and off-piste and touring, it's been shown that we need checklists and memory aids. And so what I've done is developed an accident reduction framework that has 9 points on it. I'm sharing these 3 points. 1 out of 2 seasons, about half of our accidents involve steep slopes above terrain traps, and if people had been avoiding them, we'd have half as many deaths on the off-piste. And if you're interested in seeing the complete accident reduction framework that I have, you can go on to henrysavalanchetalk.com and find that. I also have a Henry's Avalanche Talk on YouTube, where safety is freedom. Thanks very much. Have fun and be safe.